1. The knock at 3:17 a.m. the night a stranger knew my name. The man in the driveway who never blinked. She heard footsteps outside her cabin, but she lived alone. Have you ever lived so deep in the woods that silence itself starts to feel alive, like it's watching you, waiting for you to make a sound? That's exactly how it felt the night Jenna realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. When Jenna left the city behind for a quiet cabin in the Montana wilderness, she thought she was escaping chaos, the noise, the people, the sleepless nights. Out there, surrounded by snow and pine, she could finally breathe, finally write, finally heal. But peace has a strange way of turning on you when night falls. Because in the dark, where the only sound should have been the wind, she began to hear something else. Slow, steady footsteps circling her cabin. And the worst part? She lived completely alone. You're the knock at 3:17 a.m., the night a stranger knew my name. It was one of those cold, sleepless nights in upstate New York, the kind where silence feels heavy, and even the ticking of a clock sounds like thunder. Claire had moved into her small rental house just 3 weeks earlier, trying to start fresh after a messy breakup and a string of sleepless city nights. Her new home stood alone at the edge of a dense pine forest, the kind of place where cell service fades and neighbors are more of a rumor than reality. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind was howling outside, brushing the old window frames and making the branches scrape against the roof. She sat curled up on her couch, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the table beside her, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. It was 3:17 a.m. when she first heard it, a single, deliberate knock on her front door. 3 knocks. Slow, spaced, and chillingly intentional. For a moment she thought she imagined it. Maybe the wind had slammed a loose shutter, but then it came again, louder this time. 3 more knocks. Her heart thudded. She froze, staring at the door across the dimly lit room. The porch light was off, and through the curtain she could only see darkness. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Who in their right mind would be at someone's door at 3:17 in the morning, especially this far out in the woods? Her mind began racing through possibilities. Maybe someone's car broke down on the nearby road, maybe a lost traveler. But deep down, something didn't feel right. There was no sound of a car, no footsteps leading up, no voice calling for help. Just silence, and then another knock. Slower this time, heavier, almost like the person knew she was standing there on the other side listening. Claire's throat went dry. She quietly reached for her phone to call the police, but of course, no signal. She cursed under her breath, her fingers trembling as she moved toward the window beside the door. Pulling the curtain aside just a hair, she peered out. Her porch light flickered weakly, buzzing like a dying insect, and that's when she saw him. A tall figure standing perfectly still facing her door. His face was hidden in shadow, but she could make out the outline of a coat, long and tattered, the kind that looked more like it belonged to another time. He wasn't moving, not even an inch, just standing there, watching. The air inside felt suddenly heavier, colder. Her mind screamed to back away, to stay quiet, to not let him know she was there. But then, as if he'd read her thoughts, the man spoke. His voice was calm, deep, and disturbingly steady. "Claire, open the door." Every hair on her body stood on end. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. How did he know her name? She hadn't met anyone in this town yet. Hadn't even changed her mailing address officially. The man outside repeated himself, this time softer, like he was coaxing a child. "Claire, I know you're awake." The lights flickered again, dimming and then flaring back to life. Her teacup rattled on the table. She backed toward the kitchen, scanning the counter for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers wrapped around a kitchen knife, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to scream, to run, but fear pinned her down. Then, after what felt like forever, silence again. No voice, no knocking. Just the sound of the wind outside. Slowly, she crept back toward the window. The man was gone. Her heart raced even faster. Sometimes the unknown was worse than what you could see. She locked the door, double-checked the windows, and turned off all the lights, sinking to the floor behind her couch. Minutes dragged into an hour. The forest outside seemed unnaturally still, as if even the animals were holding their breath. Around 4:20 a.m., exhaustion began to blur her thoughts. Maybe it had been a sick prank. Maybe someone from town had looked her up online. She was just starting to drift off when she heard it again, this time from the back door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Her stomach twisted. He had gone around the house. She crawled to the kitchen, clutching the knife so tight her knuckles turned white. The back door had a small window covered by a lace curtain. The knocks came again, closer this time, almost impatient. "Claire." The voice was quieter now, right against the glass. "Let me in. It's cold." She pressed her back against the fridge, her mind screaming for a plan. Then her phone buzzed. A notification blinked through the cracked screen. "No service, emergency calls only." She dialed 911 anyway, whispering as quietly as she could to the operator who answered. The woman on the line tried to stay calm as Claire described what was happening, but before she could finish there was a sudden loud bang, like a fist slamming against the back door. Then another, and another. The operator told her to stay quiet and hide. Police were on their way. Claire ducked into her pantry, pulling the door shut behind her. She could hear the man now, walking slowly along the wooden porch outside. Each step creaked, deliberate and heavy. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. She held her breath, praying he'd leave. Minutes crawled by. Then she heard something scrape against the door. Metal on wood. He was trying the handle. Her heart slammed in her chest as the latch jiggled. Then the sound stopped. A new noise took its place, faint tapping on the window beside the pantry. Claire's eyes darted to the small glass square on the door. Through the tiny opening she could see part of the backyard illuminated by the moonlight, and a face. The man was crouched there grinning, his eyes glinting through the darkness. He whispered something she couldn't make out, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She stifled a sob, clutching the knife tighter. Then as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone again. The silence stretched on. 10 minutes, 20. The faint sound of sirens in the distance broke through the stillness. Relief flooded her chest. Help was coming. She stayed in the pantry until she heard the pounding on the front door. This time, the police calling her name. When she finally stepped out, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. 2 officers swept through the house, flashlights cutting through the dark rooms. The back door had fresh scratches near the lock, and muddy footprints trailed across the porch. But the man was gone. They searched the surrounding woods until dawn, but found nothing. No footprints, no tire marks, no sign that anyone had ever been there. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, walked her to the patrol car to take a statement. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you said he knew your name." She nodded, still trembling. "Yes, he said it like he'd known me for years." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then hesitated. "This might sound strange," he said, "but the last person who rented this house, her name was also Claire. She went missing 3 years ago, never found." Claire's blood ran cold. Her mind spun as the realization sank in. The man at the door hadn't just known her name. He might have thought he was talking to someone else, someone who'd never left. As dawn crept over the forest, painting the sky pale gray, Claire packed a bag and left the house for good. But she swears even now, when the wind picks up at night, she can still hear faint knocking, 3 slow, deliberate taps, somewhere in the distance, as if someone's still looking for the wrong Claire. To the man in the driveway, who never blinked. It was one of those long winter evenings in suburban Ohio when the snow muffles every sound and turns the whole world into a frozen still life. The streets were empty, streetlights humming softly, and the only movement came from the swirling flakes drifting through the cold air. Mark Thompson had just finished dinner with his wife Lisa and their 6-year-old daughter, Emma. They lived in a cozy single-story home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and nothing bad ever seemed to happen. That night, after Lisa put Emma to bed, Mark went to the living room, grabbed a beer, and turned on the late-night news. It was 11:46 p.m. when he first noticed something strange, a shape standing just beyond the glow of his driveway light. At first he thought it was one of the neighbor's kids or maybe a deer, but as his eyes adjusted, the shape became clearer. It was a man. He was standing at the edge of the driveway, motionless, facing the house. His hands hung loosely by his sides and his head tilted ever so slightly downward, as if he were studying the ground. Or waiting. Mark squinted, pressing his face closer to the window, but the man didn't move. Not even a twitch. The snow was falling thick now, coating the ground, yet the figure just stood there, unmoving. Mark felt an uneasy chill crawl up his spine. He glanced at the clock again. 11:47 p.m. "Lisa," he called softly. "Can you come here a sec?" She appeared from the hallway, her robe tied loosely, her face half asleep. "What is it?" Mark pointed toward the window. "Someone's out there." She frowned, stepping closer to look. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The figure remained perfectly still, a dark silhouette against the white snow. "Maybe it's a neighbor?" she said uncertainly. "Or someone's car broke down." "Maybe," Mark muttered, though he didn't believe it. There were no tire tracks leading up the street. The cul-de-sac hadn't seen another car for hours. He decided to go check it out, but Lisa grabbed his arm. "Mark, wait. Don't." "It's probably nothing," he said, forcing a small smile. "I'll just ask if he needs help." He slipped on his boots and jacket, grabbed the flashlight from the counter, and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap, sharp and biting. Snow crunched under his feet as he made his way down the short path to the driveway. "Hey," he called out. "You okay out here?" No response. The man didn't move, not even to turn his head. Mark's beam of light cut through the falling snow, illuminating the stranger's face. What he saw made his stomach twist. The man's skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes wide open. He wasn't blinking, not once, just staring straight ahead like a mannequin come to life. His expression was blank, emotionless, but his lips were parted slightly as if caught mid-breath. "Sir?" Mark said again, his voice shaking slightly. "Do you need something?" Still nothing. Just that eerie, unbroken stare. Mark took another cautious step forward, his boots crunching the snow. The man's clothes were odd, an old-fashioned suit soaked and stiff from the snow, the fabric torn at the sleeve. He looked out of place, like he'd stepped out of another decade entirely. Mark's instinct screamed to go back inside, but curiosity and concern held him there. Then, without warning, the man's head tilted upward, slowly, mechanically, until his eyes met Mark's. They locked onto him, and for a few seconds neither moved. The man's lips twitched, forming what might have been the beginning of a smile, but it never quite reached his eyes. Mark's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. "Okay," he muttered, backing away. "I'm gonna call someone for you, all right?" As he turned to head back inside, the man spoke. His voice was dry and hoarse, like wind scraping through dead leaves. "Don't go inside." Mark froze mid-step. The words cut through the cold air like a blade. He turned slowly. The man hadn't moved an inch, but his mouth was slightly open now, steam curling from his lips in the freezing air. "What did you say?" Mark asked, his voice unsteady. The man blinked, finally, but when his eyes reopened, they seemed darker, emptier. "Don't go inside," he repeated. "She's not your wife." Mark's breath caught. For a second, his mind couldn't process it. "What did you just say?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, snow gathering on his shoulders, his face expressionless again. Mark stumbled backward, shaking his head. "You're out of your mind," he muttered, hurrying up the steps and back inside. Lisa was waiting at the door, her eyes wide. "What did he say?" she asked. "Nothing," Mark lied. "He's just some nutcase. I'll call the police." He locked the door behind him and grabbed the phone. But before he could dial, the power went out. The whole house plunged into darkness. Emma started crying from her room, and Lisa rushed to comfort her. Mark grabbed his flashlight again and went to the front window. The man was gone. The driveway was empty, covered in untouched snow. Not even footprints where he'd stood. Mark's hands trembled. He turned the flashlight toward the glass, but the reflection of his own face only deepened the dread in his gut. A strange noise echoed from down the hall, a slow creak like footsteps on old floorboards. Lisa's voice came faintly from Emma's room. "Mark, is that you?" He swallowed hard. "No," he called back. The footsteps stopped. Then another sound followed. The faint click of a door closing somewhere deeper in the house. Mark moved cautiously toward the sound, every instinct telling him to run, but he couldn't leave his family. He turned the corner toward the kitchen and saw the back door slightly open. Snow was drifting in. His flashlight beam caught something on the floor, a single wet footprint, barefoot, too large to be Lisa's or Emma's. He slammed the door shut and bolted it. "Lisa!" he shouted. "Get Emma, we're leaving!" But as he ran down the hall, he froze in the doorway to Emma's room. Lisa was sitting on the edge of the bed, cradling their daughter, but something about her seemed off. Her head tilted toward him slowly, unnaturally. Her smile was too wide. "It's okay, honey," she whispered. "Everything's fine now." Mark's skin crawled. Her voice in it wasn't quite right. There was an echo to it, like two tones overlapping. "Lisa," he said carefully. "We're leaving. Right now." She didn't move, just stared. "Don't you trust me, Mark?" Her words hung in the air like frost. He took a step back. Emma's eyes fluttered open, but she didn't look at him. She was staring at her mother's face, her little voice trembling as she whispered, "Daddy, that's not Mommy." Mark's heart nearly stopped. The lights flickered suddenly, then buzzed back to life. In that brief flash, he saw it, Lisa's reflection in the window. But it wasn't her face. It was his own, distorted, smiling. He stumbled backward, grabbing Emma and bolting for the front door. When he looked back, Lisa was still sitting there, head cocked, that eerie grin plastered across her face. He yanked the door open and rushed outside into the cold night, clutching his daughter. The driveway was empty again, but not for long. The man was back, standing exactly where he had been before, facing the house. He didn't move as Mark ran past, didn't turn his head, didn't blink. Just watched. The snow swirled around him, yet it never seemed to stick to his coat. Mark ran to his truck, fumbling with the keys, shoving Emma inside. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. He looked up one last time. The man was closer now, halfway up the driveway. His pale face expressionless, Mark slammed the gas pedal, the tires spinning against the snow before gripping the road. He didn't stop driving until he reached the nearest gas station 10 miles away. The police searched the house that night but found nothing. No footprints, no intruder, no sign of forced entry. Lisa was gone, completely, no trace of her. The only thing left was her robe on the bedroom floor and a faint, wet footprint leading toward the back door. Mark never went back to that house. But sometimes, he said, when he's driving late at night, he catches a glimpse of a figure in his rearview mirror. A tall man standing perfectly still on the side of the road, eyes unblinking, waiting for him to stop. She heard footsteps outside her cabin, but she lived alone. The snow had been falling all day, thick and relentless, swallowing the forest in a blanket of white. By nightfall, it was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, heavy, absolute, and lonely. Jenna had been living alone in her small wooden cabin deep in the Montana woods for nearly 4 months, ever since she'd left her busy city life behind in Seattle. She wanted peace, solitude, a chance to clear her head and finish the book she'd been trying to write for years. The cabin was beautiful, rustic but cozy, perched near a frozen lake and surrounded by pine trees that whispered when the wind blew. But that night, as the storm raged outside, the whispering felt more like warning. Around 11:30 p.m., the power flickered once, then went out completely, leaving Jenna wrapped in darkness. She sighed, pulled her blanket tighter, and reached for her flashlight. "Great," she muttered. "Guess it's just you and me, nature." The fire in the fireplace had burned low, casting long, twitching shadows across the cabin walls. She threw another log on, the crackle breaking the stillness, and tried to return to her notebook. But her concentration was gone. Something felt off. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe the silence was just too deep. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Crunch. Slow. Deliberate. The unmistakable sound of footsteps in the snow just outside her cabin. She froze, pen in midair, her heart thudding. For a moment she told herself it must have been a deer, or maybe a branch breaking under the weight of snow, but then she heard it again. Crunch, crunch. Closer this time. Her eyes darted toward the window. The thick frost made it impossible to see clearly, but she could make out movement. A faint shifting shadow passing through the pale moonlight. "Hello?" she called out nervously. No answer. She swallowed hard, her breath fogging in the cold air. She wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles away, and no one ever dropped by unannounced. She stood up slowly, grabbed her coat, and crept toward the window. The sound stopped. The silence returned, thick as the snow outside. For a moment she dared to believe she'd imagined it, but when she wiped a circle in the frost on the glass, her stomach dropped. There, halfway between the trees and the porch, were footprints, fresh, deep, leading straight toward the cabin, and none leading away. Jenna stepped back from the window, her pulse quickening. Whoever it was, they were still out there, watching, listening. She quickly grabbed her phone. No signal. The storm had cut off everything. She could feel the old wood of the cabin creak beneath her feet as she moved. every sound echoing louder than it should. Then came another noise. Not outside this time, on the porch. Slow, heavy steps. The boards groaned under the weight. Someone was right outside her door. Jenna's breath caught. Her mind scrambled for what to do. Run? Hide? Scream? She picked up the fireplace poker and held it tightly in her trembling hands. The footsteps stopped right at her door. Silence, and then 3 soft knocks. Not loud, not forceful, just enough to make her blood run cold. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. No reply. Just the sound of wind pushing snow against the walls. She took another step back, heart hammering in her chest. The doorknob rattled, slowly, as if someone was testing it, gently turning it over and over. She tightened her grip on the poker. "Go away!" she shouted, her voice cracking. Still no answer. Just the quiet scrape of metal on wood as the handle twisted again. Then after a long, breathless pause, a voice came. Low, raspy, almost broken. "Jenna." She froze. Her name. Someone outside, in the middle of the woods, in a place no one knew she lived, had just whispered her name. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her.
"Who are you?"
she yelled, backing toward the fireplace. No response. Just silence again. She waited. 1 minute, 2, 10. Nothing. Finally, she forced herself to peek through the side window, pulling the curtain just an inch. The porch was empty. The footprints stopped at her door and went nowhere else. She exhaled shakily, trying to convince herself she was imagining things. Maybe the storm had played tricks on her ears. Maybe she'd fallen asleep for a moment and dreamed the whole thing. She turned back toward the fire and screamed. A wet imprint of a hand was smeared across the inside of her window. Inside. She stumbled backward, dropping the poker, her mind spinning. How could that be? She'd been right there the whole time. She backed toward the hallway, her eyes darting around the dimly lit cabin. The silence was suffocating. Then she heard it, faint breathing. Not hers, not coming from outside. From the hallway. She turned her flashlight toward the sound, and for a second she saw nothing. Then something moved. A shape. Tall, thin, standing in the doorway to her bedroom. The beam of light caught a face. Pale, wet, eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at her. "Jenna," the voice whispered again. She screamed and swung the flashlight, the beam flickering wildly as she stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. The figure didn't move closer. It just stood there watching, as if waiting for her to do something. Then just as suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The hallway was empty, gone. She rushed to the bedroom door, but it was wide open. The window inside shattered. Cold air poured in. Snow scattered across the floor like someone had climbed through. Her breath came in quick gasps as she looked around, but there was no one there. No trace, only one thing caught her eye. Muddy footprints leading from the window to the mirror across the room. And on the glass, scrawled in something dark and wet, were 2 words, "Still here." Jenna bolted from the room, grabbed her car keys, and didn't stop running until she was outside, slamming into the snow. Her old Jeep sat half buried in white, but she managed to wrench open the door and start the engine, her hands shaking violently. The headlights cut through the storm, and for a moment she saw him, standing by the tree line, the same pale face, eyes gleaming, watching her. She floored the gas and sped down the narrow road, the tires slipping on the ice. She didn't look back again until she reached the main highway miles away. The next morning, police found her cabin door wide open. Inside there were footprints everywhere, some leading in circles, some stopping abruptly as if the person had vanished mid-step. They found no one, but when Jenna returned with them later that week to collect her things, she noticed something chilling. The footprints in the snow, the ones from that night, and were gone, melted away by time and weather. But when she stepped onto her porch, she noticed faint marks in the wood, carved deep like scratches, 4 long grooves almost like claw marks running across the doorframe, and near the edge, barely visible unless you looked closely, were words etched into the wood grain, words she hadn't seen before. "I found you once." That night, Jenna left Montana for good. She never went back, never finished her book, never talked much about what happened. But sometimes, when it's quiet and snow begins to fall outside her apartment window, she swears she can hear it again, that slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps in the snow, circling her building, stopping just beneath her window, and waiting.